Yeah.
Chris, I think this is not a surprise. I mean, we knew this was coming.
Yeah.
So what were the last couple of days like for you? I imagine you're not sweating this out. You're just sort of waiting for the inevitable to happen.
Yeah. I think you saw the writing on the wall as the season progressed, and I think we knew pretty early on, what he was hopeful that could happen. So you can't necessarily prepare for something like this, or at least you can maybe in a couple years in advance in terms of recruiting. But there's not a whole lot of preparation we could make for this. But I'm really excited. I can't tell you how excited I am for him and fully support him.
I did want to ask you about it because I remember when D'Angelo declared Thad said he knew, like, if they scrimmaged like West Virginia and D'Angelo threw some crazy passes, like, well, he's gone. Yeah. And I didn't know, like, did you have that moment this year? Like, well, we're not going to have Keita back.
I think once you saw him pile early in the Big Ten season, pile game after game after game of playing at a really high level, Bill, I think at that point you started to get the indication. It really did not happen until that point necessarily for me. You kind of got indication of that, but once he started to put week after week after week together, and maybe all of it was validated against Michigan State here, I think you started to get the sense then.
What were the conversations like between when the season ended and now, trying to help him out and advise him? Like, remember when Evan left, he talked about how he felt like he was letting people down. Did you have to counsel him at all against things like that?
No, I think he realized that his the timing is right, given that he's 22 and given that he's got his degree and all of those things kind of lined up. I think he realized he made a significant contribution to our program in his time here, but certainly this year in both his play and his leadership. So I didn't sense a whole lot of guilt on his part, and I didn't want him to. And I wanted this to be a decision that he makes with the right frame of mind, and I think honestly, Adam, I think he was pretty. He felt pretty strongly about the decision he was made. We talked a couple days after our season ended, maybe on Monday, maybe it was on Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember, and spoke for a while. And at that point, I pretty much knew that this was gonna be a situation.
And throughout the season, you always said, you don't want to look necessarily at big picture stuff or look back on the whole season until the whole chapter has been written, or however you want to put it. But what sort of legacy is he leaving behind now that this door is closed and he's moving on to the next chapter? What is, I know that it's fresh, but what is Keita? What's his legacy going to be here?
Well, it's significant. It is significant, just like it is with JT. And I think those players, the good ones here that we recruit as a coaching staff, will all realize that they stand on the shoulders of those really good players that came before them. And those good players, those good leaders, those guys who represented this university at the highest level. And I think he realized that, and so did JT. That's why I think they felt an obligation in a lot of ways to kind of put this, to make the program relevant again. And they stand on the shoulders of all those guys that have done it so well before him. So what he now can leave here, he can now leave here knowing that he did that he positioned the program in a really good place, and now he's got to pass the mantle on to the next group, and now it's their responsibility to lead it in a really effective way. And your next question may be, who's that going to be? And I would say I don't know yet. And I think we are going to have kind of another end of year. We want to make this about Keita as much as possible. We probably will have another end of the year wrap up to the season at that point.
What does this do not only for him? I know obviously you had a lot to do with it, but what does it do for the program and your coaching staff and recruiting to say that you can pitch that to kids that you are putting talent in the NBA?
Well, I think he's, it's got to happen first, right? There's some work to be done, but he's positioned himself in a really good way. But now and come draft time's a really important time for Keita. But when that happens, you're right. I think it early in the season, I think he was interesting. Early in the season, he was a little bit of a microcosm of how we were viewed. and that is not a whole lot was talked about with him in terms of the next level, full of potential, but I never saw him on any mock draft before the season got started. I didn't see him on one. Maybe he was, but I didn't see him on one. And I think what it speaks to is that he really worked hard in the off season. He developed, I think hopefully he feels like that we helped him get there in whatever way we could do that. And that, as you mentioned, that's something that sure is good that we can communicate to recruits and say, hey, look at what Keita and JT, look at how they were developed in just the 1 year that we had with them. So, he'll be a good example for that in recruiting.
Chris, you said, maybe the writing had been on the wall for a while, a couple months maybe. In the post-game locker room after the second round, you called it kind of moving parts, waiting to see what would happen.
Yeah.
Is that wishful thinking? Were you hoping that the door was not closed or that it was still open, you could come back? How long does a coach let himself maybe try to talk himself into another year of Keita?
You can dream. But this is, I did ask him, I said, what was the one thing that might have changed your mind, to say, hey, I need to come back? And he mentioned if the team struggled or was just average. And I said, I wish I would have known that during the season. I mean, listen here. I have a little bit of impact when it comes to that, so we might have changed the course of a few games. I'm kidding, obviously, but I think that we got a pretty good indication as the season progressed that this is. You don't want to have those conversations. I think the last month of the season I had one conversation with Keita when I both felt like he was worn down physically, and I also thought maybe the weight of this decision was wearing on him a little bit. And I just grabbed him and said, hey, here's my kind of reminder to just be you and lose yourself in the team as much as possible. You'll feel a lot of freedom when that happens, because I did feel like it was all kind of coming together and putting a lot of stress on him. And he responded really well to that.
Does it, I don't know if it makes any difference at all, but does it help to have the finality of him saying, gonna hire an agent, and now you suspected all along you weren't gonna have him, but now you know for sure and can go about your plans? Yeah,
I think so, and I for sure, but more than anything, I'm just really excited for him and his family, and just really, really genuinely happy for Keita and his family for this moment. But for us as a program, sure, it allows us to move forward. I think, in recruiting, there's not a whole lot, there's not a whole lot of Keita Bates-Diops out there right now that we can just kind of go and grab. So I think, in the future, if we know this might be coming a year out or 2 years out, you can hopefully plan accordingly in terms of how you put your recruiting classes together. But right now, we just celebrate with him, and then we'll kind of figure out what the next step is.
Chris, obviously you only had 1 year with Keita, but is there one moment or one thing about him that will specifically stand out to you, just as kind of define him as a Buckeye?
Well, again, the Michigan State, two things. The Michigan State game, I was so, the game was, I think, CBS game, and it was #1 team in the country. So when you see a guy who performs like that on that stage, you're just really, really happy for that young man. So that's one. The other thing was, I pulled him out of a game early in the season, in the first 3 or 4 minutes of the game. And because he just wasn't playing as hard as he needed to play. And one of you guys asked him about that. Doing your job, right? You're trying to create a controversy. I get it, I'm kidding. But you're doing your job. So one of you guys asked him about it. And I think his response was incredibly telling to me. I didn't say to him, hey, this was need to be your response, but he just said, hey, Coach, Coach said I needed to play harder. And that's I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of what I want. And I think we realized in that moment, this guy is going to be good. We realized it long before that, but it validated in our minds that he was all about the right stuff. You can't be a really good player and resist coaching. And he didn't resist coaching. He was the opposite. He craved coaching. And it's why I think he's going to be a really, really good pro.
Bruce, you talk from time to time throughout the season what you just referenced about keeping his motor high and sustaining his aggressiveness. I think that's a question that NBA scouts are going to have.
Sure.
Can that come from only him, especially now that he doesn't have a college coach reminding him about it every day? Is that going to have to come from him, or can an NBA coach like you did try to bring that out of him?
Absolutely, an NBA coach can, and I think, you know, any of us should be aware of our blind spots, right? Those areas that we have to improve in. I'm hoping that, you know, this, as a coach, I want to be aware of my blind spots. So that's one, you know, that's an area he's got to continue to grow and improve in. And I think he's aware of that. And I think both the agent he signs with, as well as the guys he trains with, as well as his future NBA coach, will continue to coach him up in that area. And the best thing about Keita is he wants that. He wants to be told the truth. Keita Bates-Diop wants to be told the truth. I go back to our first meeting when I had that conversation. He wants to be told the truth. Good players want to be told the truth. And I really do think that listen, he's going to play at the very elite level, the highest of the highest level. And I think in order to do that at a really high level, and he knows he's got to continue to grow as a player. And I think he's really open to that.
Well, Chris, you were saying obviously in recruiting now you can't go out and grab Keita right this second. And I know you're going to recruit the best kids you can recruit no matter what, obviously, in every class. But he's a top 30 national kid, you know, that came here.
That's right.
That to coach him, to see the impact he had, Big Ten Player of the Year, I don't even know how to ask this, but like, is it just like a reminder of like, man, like, we need to get a Keita Bates-Diop in recruiting every now and then. I know, you know, not right now, but just in the scheme of things,
sure,
that's a top 30 kid who became a star.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an absolute reminder that that you got to have, you know, it's as basic as it sounds. You got to have really good players and guys that have the potential to develop into really good players. And it's been you know, I think I've said over and over about the class that Coach Mon and the staff brought in with that group, and some really talented guys. And he was one that was always on the verge of reaching that potential. But he still had some good moments and played the NCAA tournament. I think his freshman year, he had some really good moments there. But absolutely, it's imperative. And I think it's a reminder, too, for us as a coaching staff, not that we needed to be, but, you know, that's in our breadbasket of recruiting, that we would like to recruit effectively. And Keita Bates-Diop, I think, is everything we as a coaching staff would want in a future Buckeye. He absolutely is a Buckeye. He's selfless. He's about continual growth and development. He's not into his own. He's not into his own stuff. He's obviously got talent and potential. He's been well raised. He's everything you want, and you know, I think that you know, I just think he's in our breadbasket, and he's a Buckeye, and that's what we got to continue to recruit. Go ahead.
You knew that you were losing 3 players after the end of the season: Jay-Sean, Cam, and Dockage, and then, you know, somewhere in the season you kind of started to think about, you know, Keita maybe going as well. Just how hard is it, or how much do you think about filling those holes during the season, and when you start thinking about that, like, we've got some big holes to fill with Jay-Sean and Keita and Cam being gone? Just
sure thing. Yeah, sure. I'll touch on this kind of briefly, and then we can maybe talk about it more when we close up the season press conference. But you know, we thought about it as soon as we got the job. Now, I don't think as soon as we got the job that we know we were going to lose Keita. At that point, we did not. You know, we thought it was maybe a possibility, but we didn't. But I think listen, we've got some work to do in recruiting, and the only way you can sustain success is to build solid recruiting class after solid recruiting class after solid recruiting class, and not have too many holes in those classes through whatever, you know, transfers or defections or whatever. And we've got to get back to building some consistently solid recruiting classes, but that's not going to happen overnight. So we knew who we were losing. We knew that was a possibility. But in this first recruiting class, we just focused on we need to have a solid recruiting class, whether we have Keita or not.
Just kind of going off of that really quick, just how hard is, I mean, in college football, you know you've got these kids for 3 years, but when you start recruiting at a high level in college basketball, it's like, okay, this guy could leave after 1 year. There's only so many spots on the roster as compared to football. You know, just you talked about making sure that you get those recruiting classes every year. Just how much harder is that to do, knowing that if you miss on a guy, that's going to affect your team for the next however many years?
Yeah, I mean, the old recruiting adage, and it's true, it's not the ones you don't get, it's the one you do get who don't fit, aren't quite good enough. Those are the ones that really hurt your program. And that's the recruiting adage for years, and it's true. It's not usually the ones you don't get, it's the ones you do get that for whatever reason don't fit. So I think that certainly we'll feel this, but we'll feel the loss of JT and Cam and Andrew. And what you hope is, can you absorb it with the classes behind them? And obviously we've had some tough stuff happen with the classes behind them, but we've got we've got a good group that we've got to continue to build upon with our roster.
When you were taking the job, did you talk to Thad about Keita and what kind of player he could become?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I talked to Thad about every guy, but did talk to Keita a little bit. And, you know, I think at that point there was so much in flux. At that point we didn't really know what was, you know, we knew he was going to graduate. We knew he could stay at Ohio State. We knew he could graduate and play somewhere else. We knew he could go to the NBA, but we just, you know, I did talk to him a little bit.
And then the coaches you played against this year, did they give you any feedback on what they've seen from Keita over the years?
Before I got the job?
No, like during the season.
Yeah, no, we don't tend to have those conversations a whole lot during the season. Before the season, they said, hey, and I stuff I share with them early on, you know, good player, full of potential, has to improve his motor, and, you know, that kind of stuff, and toughness. But the comments I got from coaches throughout the season was just, they were really impressed with him overall, his overall impact on the game. Just really impressed with how he could impact both ends.
This is half Keita, half future question, so I hope it's okay. When you took this job, I think people wondered whether or not you'd be able to recruit one-and-done guys, which, correct me if I'm wrong, you've not done previously in your career.
Never have, no.
Is there any value for yourself and the coaching staff in that you essentially had a one-and-done guy in the sense that you got Keita in June, you thought he might be really good, he was really good, and then he turned pro? Is there any valuable experience in that?
You know, I don't know. I don't know, Bill. I think that, you know, I just come back to when I get asked that question that we're really, I think we have an idea of how we want to build our program as a coaching staff, and how we want to go about doing it. And I don't really want to confine it to not recruiting this type of player or recruiting this type of player, or, you know, he's got to be just from here and can't be from there, or vice versa. The biggest requirement for us is, do they fit our criteria of what a Buckeye looks like? And man, what a great example with Keita and JT and those guys. And they absolutely are that. So I don't think we are ever going to say it can't be this. or it just has to be this. You know what I'm saying? Like, if that's a one and done guy that turns out to be one and done, or if that's a guy that turns out to be here all 4 years, we'll definitely have some 4-year guys. But I think it's going to look like a mix, and it's not really going to be dependent upon the only thing it's going to be dependent on is, do they fit how we want our program to be run? And if they don't, you know, I've said this when I took the job. This may not be for everybody, and we're okay with that. But the ones like a Keita Bates-Diop, really talented player, who are Buckeyes, those are the ones we really have to pursue with incredible persistence and hope we can add to the program.
And then when you think about what Keita might be in the pros, we know he has a very versatile offensive game, but his mid-post ability, I think, is not something you see a lot in the college game. How do you think that's going to help him when he starts being evaluated by NBA?
He's a big-time shot maker, and I think he can do it at all different spots. I really give our coaching staff a lot of credit, because they did a great job both in skill instruction with him and getting him to his spots on the floor. And Keita is probably the best, and Ryan Peden has said this multiple times. Keita is probably maybe the best guy I've ever coached. You get him to his spot, and it's over. You know, he's going to make something good happen. You just got to get him to his spot. And when we struggled at times, it was teams that, you know, thought it was a football game and somehow were allowed for it to be a football game, and they didn't let him get to his spots. And that's if he struggled, that was part of it. But he's unbelievable if you get him to his spots.
You talked on working on the motor with him and trying to get that day-to-day grind for him, I guess. How did you work on that with him? And because obviously he made improvements in that this season. I know that's still sort of the knock on him, but how did you see him work on it this year and get better at it?
You know, we just tried to make sure that his approach every day, that he was committed to that, that his effort in practice was almost like a game day effort every single day. And I think we felt like that could improve his motor. And then we, you know, reminded him in the course of a game if he wasn't quite doing that. But I just think that was kind of our Coach Q did a great job as well, keeping him in condition. And Keita owned that. You know, he owned, hey, this is where I had to continue to improve him.
And then, since he's already a graduate, does this impact APR at all, you know?
Yeah, good question. Obviously, APR is a major factor for every program, but certainly for our program. He has some academic work that he has to complete, Adam, that he's committed to completing. And if he does that, he will not, his APR will, he'll help us. If he doesn't, he'll hurt us, but he's the kind of young man that he's going to complete his academic work.